Racial tensions on the rise.
What we gonna do about tomorrow, sister?
How did we get here?
We wasn't causing any harm to nobody. We had no weapons on us at all.
A young man, Michael Brown, was shot and killed by a Ferguson police officer.
You took my son away from me. You know how hard it was for me to get him to stay in school and graduate?
Tensions rise as Brown's body lay there for hours.
So we needed to make sure that the crime scene was safe.
No justice, no peace.
Protests begin. A peaceful vigil turns violent.
You said you're scared. What are you seeing?
I'm seeing people doing stuff like breaking into stores and stuff and just doing bad stuff.
What stores did they break into?
Quick Trip.
What did they take out? Did you see them run out with anything?
Everything. They destroy everything.
There has been no rush to judgment on this case.
We gotta be out here with the people if we want some justice.
As darkness set, violence began again.
Rock him out, justice! Rock him out now! Don't be a traitor to Michael Brown in the name of you, man. No justice!
And another officer-involved shooting.
Instead of burning bridges in anger, we must rebuild them with love.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Sharon Reed.
And I'm Steve Savard. We're here inside Studio B at KMOV tonight, and we just want to talk.
We do. So much of what we've seen in our community is jarring. It's a lot to take in. So tonight, a candid conversation, one with no boundaries.
Our guests tonight have varying viewpoints. They have different experiences and different perspectives. They're all here tonight to have a community conversation.
So let's get right to it. Introducing our guest, Chief Tom Jackson with the Ferguson Police Department, Esther Haywood with the NAACP, President, St. Louis County, and Bishop Edwin Bass, President, Church of God in Christ Urban Initiatives.
Michael McMillan, CEO and President, Urban League of St. Louis. James Clark, Vice President, Better Family Life Incorporated, and Mayor James Knowles of Ferguson.
Also in our audience, Norm White is an associate professor of criminology and criminal justice at SLU. Mike Fitzgerald from Incarnate Word Foundation. He's on the Youth Violence Prevention Task Force. And of course, our investigative reporter, Craig Cheatham, joins us as well.
We're here tonight because a young man, Michael Brown, was killed on Saturday, and the facts about his death are being sorted out. We all want the truth to come out, and every day since the tragedy, we have had numerous calls for a fair and thorough investigation. Now, we know this. The world will be watching, yet some clearly are skeptical. My first question to our panelists tonight, do any of you doubt that a fair conclusion can be reached through either investigation done by the St. Louis County Police or the FBI? Ms. Haywood?
I truly feel that with the St. Louis County turning it over to the FBI and the Justice Department, along with the effort of St. Louis County, there will be justice.
Anybody else want to chime in?
How about you, Michael?
Well, we definitely agree with that. The Urban League is advocating, along with the NAACP and the Clergy Coalition, for the Justice Department to have exclusive control over the investigation.
If I could follow up with you, Chief. Sure. In many ways, it's protocol to turn this investigation over in a circumstance like this, but how does it make you feel, your department's reputation on the line?
Well, I think it's really important that we do get a fair and factual, truthful conclusion to this investigation. We all want the same thing. We want the truth and we want justice. There would be an appearance of impropriety if I had tried to conduct this investigation myself. As soon as I found out about the shooting, I had contacted Police Chief Belmer and asked him to go to the scene, have his people go to the scene, and take complete control of the investigation. So I'm very, very confident that they will come to the right conclusion.
Are we at more risk in the future based on the investigation's findings, how this turns out, and how do we get ahead of that and minimize any sort of violent reaction some may have in this community? James?
Well, I think that the outcome is going to be very, very important. I think that we must be able to have a fair conclusion, knowing that if the individual is exonerated, that there will be severe backlash. We cannot emphasize that it's a very, very volatile and it's a very, very fluid situation right now. And there are other benchmarks along the way. The young man's funeral is going to be another milestone that we have to be able to effectively mediate as much as we possibly can. So this is a very, very high-pitched, high-profile situation that is right now, for all involved, it's out of control.
Bishop, I know you want to say something, and black churches have been an integral part of this, meeting places, organizing with the protesters. What's really behind, what's at the root of this violence?
Well, let me first make a comment on the last question. If you look at justice as the destination, that's a critical destination, but the journey itself also is very important. So the disclosure of information, the community feeling that all information is readily available to the community, that things are rolling along at appropriate speed, correctly, are all part of resulting in a good end and good destination and good conclusion to this matter.
But Chief, how much information can be made public in an investigation like this? That's the rub here, is it not?
It is the rub, and it's frustrating to me as well. But the thing is, we have a whole bunch of witnesses out there who've come forward and need to be interviewed, and we need to get that information without it being clouded by facts from the case being already out there. So it's happening slowly, and I would really like to ask the county to put out more information, but they really can't at this point. They will. It'll come out.
We heard from the county prosecutor, Bob McCullough, this afternoon. We took that live, talking about what he could and couldn't do and the process moving forward. A key piece of information that's not out there is the name of the officer. Can you speak to that?
Yes, I can. So first of all, it's Bob McCullough's office policy that they don't release the name of anyone who's being investigated until they're formally charged. But we recognize that this is an important piece of information that needs to come out. What happened right before we were prepared to do that was the name of another officer on my department was released as being the shooter. And he wasn't, but his name went up on Facebook or this other social media websites, and it just was a disaster for him. He started receiving death threats. He had to take his family out of town. So we had to sit down and weigh the benefit to the public and to the media of releasing that information right now, or against the safety of the officer, his family, and his neighbors, the officer who was wrongly identified. And so we did make that decision, of course, with Bob McCullough saying he wasn't going to release the name either. But we made that decision internally that we needed to hold off on that for a little bit.
Well, Mayor, your city's taken a hit nationally. Can you speak to what can be done moving forward?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, there's going to be other milestones ahead, and there's going to be sensitivities that rise at each milestone, such as the releasing of the findings of the investigation, releasing of any other pertinent information, and of course this funeral. So I think, though, as we mentioned, we have to be showing that we are making steps, that we are talking, that we're hearing, and we're looking at moving forward as each of those milestones progress, because we don't want people to think that once this subsides that we just turned our back and not doing anything about their concerns. We wanted to let people know that we're hearing what they're saying. We want to engage those people. And we want to start having meaningful dialogue about moving forward. So,
if I can interrupt you, Mayor, what steps specifically? What are you hearing, and what steps?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of people who across the nation, there's a divide between young people and law enforcement, especially young African Americans. A lot of times in law enforcement, it's something that we hear about law enforcement not understanding young people, not understanding the community. So we need to look at ways that we can continue to engage those communities with law enforcement, making them feel part of the greater community in Ferguson and across the country, and as well as having more positive interactions with law enforcement, whether it be through school resource officer programs and others. And it's unfortunate, but over the years, especially with education funding dropping, that the first thing to go, besides sports, is school resource officer programs. The city of Ferguson, as Ferguson-Florissant School District, has eliminated those. We have undertaken the funding to make those stay. They are officers, school resource officers. They help bridge the gap between young people and law enforcement.
Well, we solicited some questions from viewers tonight on both Facebook and also Twitter.
That's right, and Instagram. This is from Travis Ferguson. The one question he says that needs an answer is all this violence really the answer to the problem? Is the violence really respecting his memory? And Michael, if you could speak to that.
Well, absolutely not. We all understand the outrage and the disgust that is in the community about this tragedy, and we're dealing with a generation of people that feel hopeless in many ways because of lack of educational opportunities, lack of jobs, lack of good housing, and an overall quality of life that most people enjoy. But violence is not the answer. We have to stop all of the rioting, all of the violence, all of the negativity that has transpired, and pay respect to this young man and let the process continue on in terms of the FBI's investigation. Peaceful protest is what we should be doing, and trying to make sure that we live up to the history of the civil rights movement and paying legacy to his life.
Ms. Haywood, you were nodding your head while Michael was giving that answer, the eloquent answer?
Very much so. Very much.
You echo his thoughts?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But what can be done, Ms. Haywood, to make sure that the violence isn't just quelled, but it doesn't bubble up again and again?
Well, hopefully, we would have to remember that many of the people that are out there are not from the community. Many of them are transplants brought in, sent in, and they hear about it. And I can imagine that opportunity presented itself there wherever it is.
Bishop Ash, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, I think also an acknowledgement that despair and frustration does not breed logical behavior. I think we've got an excellent example of that, the alleged suicide of Robin Williams as a result of frustration and despair allegedly caused him to take his life. Obviously an illogical approach. I think if the community would acknowledge that fact, that some people are not going to act in a logical way, and that's probably not unusual. At the same time, we are of the same mind that we're trying to encourage the community to avoid violence and to respect the memory of the young man who was killed by acting appropriately in the community.
We also received questions about the makeup of the Ferguson Police Department. There is a significant disparity between the racial makeup of the community in Ferguson and the Ferguson Police Department.
Would a more racially diverse police force here in Ferguson have made a difference, in your opinion, in the last 2 or 3 days?
I think, of course, it would not have made a difference.
Right now, the Ferguson Police Department has 53 officers, but only 3 are black. Compare that to the data from the latest census, showing 63% of Ferguson is African American. Pastor Spencer Lamar Booker of the St. Paul AME Church met with Chief Jackson Tuesday.
One that is sworn to protect or serve, whether black or white, must be accountable for their action.
There were more minority officers in the past, but they left for better job offers from other departments. Pastor Booker believes a more racially diverse police force would improve relations between the department and the community.
But I believe that with commitment from Chief Jackson and his family, the police officers of this city, it can happen.
We received a question via Twitter on this very topic from Susan Massey. What can Ferguson city leaders do to create more positive relations between all citizens in the community? And Chief Jackson, you and I talked about this just yesterday, and you were very, very candid about the lack of black officers in your department. You had more in the past, lost them to better paying jobs.
I did.
Tell us a little bit about your efforts to change those numbers and to recruit young people.
Well, losing them to better paying jobs, it sparks the discussion about retention. We want to be able to recruit and retain a diverse workforce. So when I got to the Ferguson Police Department 4.5 years ago, in a very short time I promoted the first 2 African American sergeants in the history of the department. And I had and I hired additional African American officers, put one through the academy, and but lost them to better paying jobs. The officers called me and said they'd like to come back, you know, after going to those jobs because they loved working here. But so we were able to, the mayor had a leadership role in this, in raising the starting pay of our police department by 11% last year. We believe this is going to help us in the future to recruit and retain. We also have improved the overall quality of life in the police department by adding better equipment, better training, more training, We're doing improvements to the police station itself. We've gotten improved vehicles. So just the kind of things that make somebody want to come and work for a police department and stay at the police department.
James Clark, a follow-up with you from the perspective of just beyond Ferguson. Let's just talk about Ferguson, but communities as a whole. How do we get young adults in communities where there is a distrust of law enforcement interested in going into law enforcement?
Well, I think that we've got to go back and look at how the police department used to engage the community. You know, as a young man coming up in North St. Louis, police officers were our friends. They frequented the neighborhood during football season. They passed out football cards. During baseball season, they would drive by and give us baseball cards. We had the Officer Friendly program that at a very young age endeared us to police officers. Over the years, the relationship has eroded. And I think that not just the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department or the Ferguson Police Department, all law enforcement needs to do a better job of engaging particularly the African American community, because there's a very strong distrust there, and it's not going to go away, and it's getting progressively worse.
So, Mr. Clark, we'll stay with you. Is that going back to community policing, boots on the ground, making sure that you know the young people who are in your neighborhood and community for police?
Absolutely. Police officers have to gain the trust of the community by being active in the community. They have gotten away from that. Maybe it's because of the increased calls, or maybe it's because of budget cuts, but they really have to do a better job in proactively, casually engaging the African American community and dealing with younger people. We are talking as early as 5 and 6 years old. They need to start engagement there.
To your point, we ran a story on News 4 a few months ago about 2 Kansas City police officers during the course of their watch stopping in a city neighborhood, shutting down the street, and playing 2-on-2 basketball with a couple of 12-year-olds. Those are the that's the kind of thing you're referencing here, you're talking about?
Yes.
You think that would make a difference, Bishop?
I absolutely do. And if you juxtaposition that against the alleged events that led to this, that a young man was stopped because he was walking in the street, and you compare that to what you could have from community policing, the question is how sensitive are the police, and how sensitive should they be to perhaps overlooking minimal kinds of breaking of the law or some regulation in the interest of serving the broader long-term purpose of establishing a relationship in the community. So I would suggest that perhaps the best way to handle this one would have been for the policeman to overlook a kid walking in the street. That was not big. Yeah, it was not big enough to further deteriorate the relationship between the policeman and the community.
Mayor, where do you go from here with such a lack of trust and police on your department being looked at as antagonists? Where do you go from here?
Well, I think as was already mentioned, I think we need to find more positive outlets to have officers involved in these young people's lives. We have had over the past several years several of our officers, and including myself, as I'm not an officer, but we both were coaches at McClure South Berkeley High School. One of our other African American officers, I believe we've had 2 over the years who have been coaches at McClure South Berkeley. So I mean, we've had these positive interactions with local leaders, with local law enforcement, but we really need to expand that. I mean, we need to find ways to provide opportunities for those kind of positive interactions, those kind of mentoring interactions. And so I think there, as was mentioned before, we've had these programs in the past, but I think unfortunately as budget cuts happen, as we've mentioned about SRO programs through the schools have happened, they start to go by the wayside, and we need to go back to that.
Chief Jackson, another question from Facebook. It comes from Krista Harder. She asks, do the officers that patrol Ferguson live in Ferguson? And if not, why is that not a requirement?
It's not a requirement. We do have several officers who do live in the city of Ferguson. We provide incentives. They get additional pay if they live within the city limits, and they also are eligible for the resident officer program where they get a car to take home.
With the eye of the country on our area, a well-known civil rights activist made it clear he was coming to town. And indeed, the Reverend Al Sharpton showed up here and really found himself a key figure in this controversy. Did his presence help ease tension?
Don't be a traitor to Michael Brown in the name of you man.
The Reverend Al Sharpton on the old courthouse steps pushing back against the outbreak of violence. He urged calm.
I think his message today was a good message. You know, what he talked about was everybody heeding the wishes of the family.
Political leaders and Michael Brown's parents right there by his side. It's clear the family is embracing Sharpton's presence. Is the family grateful for that presence?
Yes, we are.
We did not come to divide the city.
Early yesterday afternoon, and then there was this last night. The tone a little different.
No justice. What do we want? What do we want? What do we want? When do we want it? When do we want it? When do we want it? All right.
And so with that, this is something that comes up whenever Al Sharpton comes to town. And Michael McMillan, I want to put it to you. The question, does the Reverend Al Sharpton's presence help the cause here, or can it hurt it?
Well, I think Reverend Sharpton made national attention come to this matter in a more significant way than had been the case in the past. And I believe his message of nonviolence, of paying respect to the family, and making sure that the federal government is in charge of the investigation is one that we can all agree with and support, and I think his presence helped.
Chief, I saw you nodding your head. Do you agree that Reverend Al Sharpton's presence here is a good thing?
I do. And the rhetoric toward the police department aside, that was a very important message. And I was, while he was here and marching out with the protesters that evening, I was being texted by Bishop G, who's one of our local pastors, and he texted me, all is well here, peace has arrived, and everything was calm. So his message resonated, that message of nonviolence, and that's really the message that I want, you know, just protest, just nonviolently.
Ms. Haywood, can you speak to that?
Truthfully, Al Sharpton truly is a motivator when it comes to areas. But of course, he's different from the teaching of the NAACP.
How so?
Well, we believe in the same thing, but we just present it in a different way. And it may be that, maybe the little difference there. He's more excitable.
Rhetoric?
More excitable than we are.
You're a little bit more low-key in delivering your message?
Yes, absolutely.
Most people are. Though.
Yeah, so it may, that takes charge sometimes. But we do have the same idea about what we need and what we're going to do. And we're glad that he came, that the family, but what this family is going to need a whole lot of moral support. They're going to need money. They're going to need to bury a son. So right now we need to help them and help the children in the neighborhood. Be surprised at many of the kids that are going back to school. They need help. They need someone to talk with them and tell them what they're hearing. They don't understand it. So therefore we may look at Ferguson to maybe bring on counselors and pay for some help for the children. You know?
Mr. Clark, can we ask you this? You're the expert when it comes to young black males in particular. Al Sharpton, is he of too much of an older generation? Do we need a young leader that they'll listen to? Are they listening to him?
Well, you know, I think that Mr. Sharpton's presence does validate this in a big way. But I do think that we do need to be able to engage those and keep their perspective on this issue. We cannot lose focus of the climate that was created by the individuals and the individuals that created it. You know, I was at a meeting last night and I looked around the room and we were in a church field and there were still individuals outside protesting. Their narrative has to remain the focus point throughout this process. We cannot have this become another intellectual discourse and conversations that they're not a part of, because at the root of this are their basic needs. Just as Mr. McMillan said, this is a cry for help. This is a cry for attention. And as it continues to unfold, we've got to remember that. We cannot let this episode occur and not change the paradigm. We've got to be in our neighborhoods. We've got to deliver individuals because we've allowed them to become segregated. They are now isolated, and they have their own subculture. And it's a very, very unsettled subculture that is growing. It doesn't get better, it gets worse.
All the tension we've witnessed over the last few days didn't suddenly surface overnight. When we come back in 90 seconds, we look back at some of the deep-seated beliefs in some of the communities here in the St. Louis area. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. Last summer, some of our community activists predicted that some of our most troubled neighborhoods are on the edge of lawlessness.
It's because the communities had been neglected and oppressed for so many years. News 4 Investigates' Craig Cheatham was told that all it would take was an event that would rip the scab off those deep wounds.
That event proved to be the deadly shooting of Michael. Now, there were issues in that neighborhood and many other urban neighborhoods in the St. Louis area long before the killing of Michael. Those issues include feelings of isolation and oppression. This week, Ferguson has looked like a police state.
It's not funny. What?
The anger.
What we gonna do about tomorrow, sister?
The confrontations. And most of us never saw it coming. But the deep resentment and feelings of isolation and oppression have been there for a very long time.
You can read about things in the paper, but it means nothing to you if you don't live there and understand the outcry.
Right now, our neighborhoods are war zones like never before.
A year ago, James Clark, vice president of Better Family Life, told me decades of neglect in some of our most vulnerable communities was creating so much anger and unrest that if it wasn't addressed, it could explode, just like what happened in Ferguson.
And our young people are becoming more and more brazen. So we've got to get very, very serious, or we will see St. Louis almost come to a state of lawlessness.
It's a 45 minutes in between your eyes.
Some of it is based on the way people, especially African Americans, are treated by some cops. Like this example in Brooklyn, Illinois, captured by a camera on a local officer.
Like a airplane. Go ahead and cuff him.
In Ferguson and many other communities, police are far more likely to pull over black drivers and search them, even though a report by the Missouri Attorney General's office says whites are more likely to have drugs on them.
They killed my baby boy.
During our investigations over the last decade, many residents in some of the region's poorest and most violent neighborhoods have told us they don't trust the police.
Police won't do nothing. Come on now. But they say they still looking for them. You're not looking for them.
And that the cops often treat them with little respect.
3 of my sons has been shot.
Kimberly Schooler's 21-year-old son Jordan was shot and killed in East St. Louis. But despite that, she refuses to cooperate with police on any other case. If you knew who shot somebody, you wouldn't tell the police?
No, because they're not going to do nothing. So you put your own life in danger because they're not going to protect you. They don't care nothing about you.
That belief doesn't reflect the view of all residents, but it does echo the lack of trust in law enforcement and the fear of some of her neighbors. During our documentary, A Vicious Cycle, we explored the pushback toward cops. Terrell Golson, who died since our interview, was a former gang leader and enforcer.
20 years ago, you'd be running and trying to hide and all that from the police. Yeah, back then you would.
Not today.
No, today is what it is, you know what I'm saying? You up yours, I'm up mine, we're going to see who get the first draw, you know?
But that's only part of the problems in the areas James Clark talked about.
No one feels safe today.
When you combine that with extreme poverty, high unemployment, low percentages of home ownership, and single-parent families that move frequently, creating even more instability, and then add racial segregation and the feeling by a race of people that they are isolated, you have an environment that is stressful and broken to a degree that many of us can't imagine unless we live there and experience it every day.
We can either sit back and continue to watch our society spiral out of control, or we can say, let's get smart about it and let's begin to do things differently, because the way that we do things today is not working.
James and I have had many conversations over the years, particularly over the last year. That story was not an attempt to justify criminal behavior. It was not an attempt to justify looting or a criminal response to the shooting of Michael. It was simply an effort to explain the emotion behind the protest and the pushback. Steve and Sharon.
Thank you, Craig. And with that, James Clark, let's go right back to you. You and I spoke about this very issue in March of this year. You predicted a violent summer in St. Louis. And the question, what can we do to change attitudes amongst young people?
Well, Sharon, it's going to take a total paradigm shift. We have built models through our intellectual discourse that are just not relevant to what's going on today. We have become too intellectual in trying to deal with social issues when we need to begin to use our instinct. Our instinct tells us that we have allowed neighborhoods to go unserviced with resources for far too long. So we think that we've got to get back to the basics. We need neighborhood-based resource delivery models. We need to be in the living rooms, we need to be on the front porches, and we need to be able to assess individuals in the neighborhoods in which they live and then bring the resources to their front door. See, that's the only way out of it. We have all kind of measurements, and we've come up with all types of theories, evidence-based models and things that theoretically sound good, but they're not applicable today. We need a paradigm shift that says we've got to start from the bottom and deliver resources in our more challenged neighborhoods. The longer it takes us to come to that conclusion, the longer we will see these type of episodes play out, and they don't get better, they get worse.
Michael, you and I spoke just yesterday about a lack of hope. Are jobs the answer? Mr. Clark's talking about resources.
Jobs are definitely part of the solution, and we definitely agree at the Urban League that we need to get involved in the neighborhoods in a more significant way, do more grassroots development, partner with organizations like Better Family Life so that we can be part of the solution on a very, very significant grassroots basis in our most depressed neighborhoods, because as James said, this is not going to get any better. It's going to continue to get worse, and unfortunately the events of the past week have set us back tremendously. St. Louis is now the headquarters of the civil rights movement of 2014, and we have to do something to change that.
Bishop, are you worried about the perception of St. Louis outside St. Louis, Missouri at this point? It's in the national news now for 4 or 5 straight days.
Absolutely. I live in this community, and I would love to see our community reflected in a positive way. I also just want to make a comment that everybody has to act differently now. We focused on this point in discussing policing, but it also, even in the religious community, we have to do things differently. Most religious organizations have focused around having religious services. We are concerned about people's eternity, but we really have to shift our thinking to now start thinking about their right now. And so in my denomination, the Church of God in Christ, we've created an organization called Urban Initiatives, and we focus around 5 key areas. We have 12,000 churches throughout the United States, and many of them are in depressed areas. And we're focusing on 5 areas: education, economic development or job creation, crime reduction, or a family, strengthening the family with particular emphasis on the African-American male. And the fifth area is on financial literacy, how to earn, spend, invest, save money wisely. And what we're doing with our 12,000 churches is providing programming that we can begin to address that. For example, we offer financial literacy training through Wells Fargo, one of our strategic partners. And we offer it in the local congregation where I pastor, but we're also implementing it throughout the United States in our churches, where we really start shifting. We're trying to draw a line in the sand and make a difference in the emerging generation, where we can really shift the way they think and also open up additional opportunities. So the church is reacting differently. I think businesses have to react differently. Government has to react differently. Not-for-profits have to act differently, because if we continue to do the same thing, we're going to continue to get the same results.
What about social media, urban radio? We hear a lot of outcry in those venues. Do we need to speak directly on those?
Well, you know, social media is a very, very dangerous portal, and it's here to stay. And the ways that we combat it is we have to have parents become more active as their young people engage their peers. One of the things that is fueling this movement is social media. And so we really need parents, because law enforcement can't police parental responsibility. So too often parents are not involved, and so to deal with the social media wave is not going anywhere. Parents have got to be more active, because social media is very, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous.
Mayor, how about you? In seeing some of the lawlessness, do you think parents getting more involved, if they can, would have made a difference?
I think so. You know, going a step further than some of the conversations we've already had, I think one of the root problems that we see is housing, and I think Mr. Clark and I spoke about it off air. You know, there's a lot of people we're trying to bring into the fold. You know, we want the parents to be involved, but we want these people to be involved in the community, be part of the community. But there's a housing crisis, not just nationwide, but across North County. There's a lot of transient families who, well, when you ask them where you live, they'll tell you they stay somewhere, and they don't. That's not vernacular difference. That's because they stay there and then they move on. And so we need to be able to find a place where we can have people come and stay for more than 6 months or a year at a time. I mean, that's one of the biggest problems in our school districts. That's what's wrong with a lot of the schools. If you can't put down roots, if you can't make that investment from a community into a person and help that investment grow before they move on somewhere else, we've got to start there so we can keep them there and continue to pour on those resources. And that's been a problem that we're experiencing all over North County.
Well, as we said, there is a deep-rooted distrust of police among some in our area. Last month, News 4 broke down the numbers in a new report from the Missouri Attorney General on racial profiling. The results were staggering and had us asking local police chiefs about that issue.
Across the state, police pull over black drivers 66% more often than white drivers. The St. Louis branch of the NAACP tells us the statistics released by the Attorney General, coupled with reports they've received, are alarming and show people are being arrested for what they called driving black in the St. Louis area.
As a police chief, how do those numbers strike you?
I think it strikes me as appalling. However, frustrating also. I think that a lot of the police departments are actually doing a very good professional job and pulling people over.
Earlier this summer, I spoke with St. Anne Chief Aaron Jimenez, who says his department has a policy on racial profiling, and racial profiling is included in continuing education for officers.
It's really being about a good person and not being racist. And I can guarantee our citizens that we don't have any racist officers, and we're not going to tolerate that.
This leads us into our next Facebook question. There are countless reports and stats about racial profiling. Whatever becomes of these figures? And Chief Jackson, I'll go to you here. How does your department process these stats? How do they respond? How do they use these statistics?
So once we get our data back from the Attorney General's office, they will determine if there's a problem or an issue that needs to be addressed, but we also do that internally. So when I look at the statistics, I see that, you know, even though we have a minority community, our disparity index is higher than I would like it to be. So we do have training in racial profiling on a regular basis. I have 2 of my officers who became trainers for racial profiling, so we give the classes internally, and not just driving while black type things, but other profiling against Muslims and others. So we just want to make sure it's an ongoing effort to make sure that racial profiling does not occur. We also have a policy against it, and it's not tolerated.
Esther Haywood, what does the NAACP hope comes from studies like this, statistics that are made public, and do you have any confidence that it will change what's going on?
Not too sure that it will change soon with 94 municipalities, and all of them are operating on a different scale. You may go from St. Anne to Ferguson, maybe over to another one, and all different. Different training of the police, I assume, and it's just a long story behind it. If you were to go to any of the courts in the areas, you would find long lines of nothing but the minorities. And if you go over to the other side, where there's a predominantly white community, it's still a long line. There's just no way out. So I don't really know if the same training is happening.
Michael, you were nodding your head, and one of the worst feelings in the world is to be accused of something you haven't done. I can't imagine being pulled over simply because of the color of your skin while you've not done anything wrong. You're nodding your head. What do you think can come out of studies like this and statistics that are made public? Do you have confidence, or are you optimistic?
Well, this has been going on for decades in St. Louis, and if you go to traffic courts in the county or in the city, you will see throngs of African Americans. And going back to your question earlier when you talked about the equal distribution of jobs, in this particular case we're talking about 53 policemen, 50 Caucasian, 3 minority. In a community that's over 60% black, that's not a fair and equitable distribution of resources. And everyone pays taxes to their government and expects fairness. So I think obviously the government is aware that this is an issue now and needs to take corrective measures to make sure that that number changes. But it's not just the number in Ferguson. That's all over the entire region. Right. So we have to do much better, because people pay taxes to their government and they expect fairness and equity. And that comes in the form of jobs, treatment, contracts, and an overall quality of life.
Chief, do you feel like you're up against it in this way? You said that race relations is something that you felt like in Ferguson was all well or mostly well. Mostly. Some people are now saying, you're saying all the right things, but is there really the heart in your gut, in your belly, to do these things after the national spotlight's gone?
Absolutely. I'm passionate about this. I can tell you a story. When I was 17 years old, I was driving with an African-American friend. We were just going to play in the pit orchestra at the Kirkwood Players. And we were pulled over in a certain community, and they took us out of the car and separated us and asked me if my parents knew who I was with. And I said, yeah, my mother just cooked dinner for them. So I'm very aware of that kind of behavior, and I have been all my life. And one of the things as a police officer and as a supervisor, sergeant, lieutenant growing up, I want to be certain that that doesn't happen. I know it does, but not on my watch. I don't want it to happen. So when it does happen, I take corrective action. I grew up in this North County area. I love it, and I want to be a part of it.
Let's go to our next Facebook question if we can. It's from Cody Las Vegas, and the question is, how much of a role is social media in all of this? There are some specific examples over the past few months that may answer that. Mr. Clark, back to you.
Well, you know, just as I said earlier, social media is playing a major role. Facebook is full of videos. Twitter is full of videos. People are making plans on what the next moves will be on social media. So, but there's no way to regulate it. So social media is a big part of this, and social media will continue to be a big part of this situation.
All right, as we said, specific examples do exist. Let's take a look.
This fight from March on Delmar.
I just saw a gang of kids, teenagers, gang of them, maybe over 100 of them.
Then this massive fight in South St. Louis a few weeks later. Police telling News 4 it was a brawl between two groups, part of the increasingly common organized fight mob.
That's a lot of people. And it's not going to stop there. It's just not going to. It's going to escalate, as that gentleman said, and it's going to get worse and worse. And I'm not leaving my home.
Then, just this month, a violent attack on the Del Mar Loop. 2 teens are in custody for this one.
This type of behavior, whether it's in the Del Mar Loop, on the Metrolink trains, in Forest Park, downtown, will not be tolerated.
St. Louis Police Chief Sam Dodson spoke with News 4 right after the group violence on Del Mar in March.
Now we have a plan with University City, Washington University, everybody, to try and address any future problems like this.
Get right to Dr. White in our audience, a professor of criminology and criminal justice at St. Louis University. And Dr. White, these groups seem to be very, very angry. Can you speak to the underlying emotion leading to these crimes?
I think that we need to go back a little bit. You had talked about no boundaries earlier. We've been, as a nation, on an imprisonment bin since the 1960s. So since in the 1960s, 70s, we had about 600,000 people in prison. Over the course of the next 20 years, we got up to 2 million people in prison on a daily basis. And we lead the world in imprisonment. We have, in reaction to the problems that were going on with the gangs and drugs in the 90s, 80s, and 90s, decided that we were going to do broken windows policing, so that we started to pick up people for the most minor and most trivial of offenses and bring them into contact with the criminal justice system. These young men are angry as they can be, and rightfully so. That they get stopped for walking down the middle of a street. They get stopped for walking in a mall, or they get followed around in malls like that's appropriate behavior. I'm not justifying the behavior, but it needs to be understood that you take the resources out of communities. You have communities that are in despair. That Michael talked about the hopelessness. James has talked about the struggle that these guys go through. If you have that condition, you're going to have these kind of problems. And the issue for me is that I've been looking at the impact of neighborhoods, and we've known this for 200 years. 200 years of research says you can't have communities that are struggling like this and not have these outcomes. And it happens worldwide, so it's not African Americans. It's kids in Europe, it's kids in South America, it's kids in Africa. That if you don't have the resources for communities, if you treat them as though they're outsiders, you're going to get this kind of behavior at some point because it's frustration. It bubbles up. So at some point, we need to take an accounting of ourselves about what it is that we are doing in terms of allowing kids an opportunity to grow up and feel like they're valued.
All right, Professor, so a group of young people who feel like they're under a cloud of suspicion. It's a conversation we're going to continue.
Yeah, so where do we go from here, and what are the efforts in place already to try and help fight the rising tide of youth violence and racial tension? We take a look when we come back.
Welcome back. There is a difference in what nonprofits and charities can do to try to stop the violence and the efforts from our local governments. So what are the steps being taken in St. Louis City and St. Louis County? Troubles you greatly.
Yeah, it sure does. It sure does, because, you know, when people talk about safety in a city, it's not just about being safe, it's about feeling safe.
Over the past year, I've had many conversations with St. Louis Mayor Slay on violent crime in St. Louis. Last summer, he unveiled a youth violence prevention task force. That task force works with St. Louis City, St. Louis County, and East St. Louis to fight the rising rate of crimes committed by young people.
By collaborating and being more intensive, having a more intensive focus, I think we can be even more successful.
But all of this sounds familiar. More than 20 years ago, during the violent summer of '93, a similar idea was formed under then-Mayor Freeman Bosley, a special task force on youth crime.
An open hand for those who want to be helped, and a closed one for those who don't want to be helped.
So, have things changed in 2 decades with this new battle against youth violence?
Now we have to prioritize and be serious about the conversation about funding these types of programs. And the change is not overnight. It's a long-term change, but we have to be dedicated to doing that.
Joining us with more information on that Youth Violence Prevention Task Force is Mike Fitzgerald of the Incarnate Word Foundation. Mike, thank you for being here. And Mayor Slay pulled together a regional youth violence prevention task force. Okay, what are the key strategies involved in trying to break the cycle of violence with area youth?
On a very macro level, we're looking at prevention, intervention, and reentry for youth who are involved potentially in the juvenile justice system, as well as kids who are not in the juvenile justice system. One of the things that we, meaning Incarnate Word, is involved with is STL youth jobs. We identified throughout this task force that kids need opportunity, again, because of the poverty and despair, and sometimes generational poverty and unemployment. So with the support of many foundations in the community, corporations, over the last 2 years, we've been able to employ 600 youth over the past 2 summers and place them in jobs where they have job coaches, where they receive financial literacy, they receive classes on how to conduct yourself in the workplace, and it's been a very successful program.
So they need opportunities to learn essential skills and experience financial stability?
Yes, essential skills and the opportunity to manage their own finances and earn their own finances. It builds self-esteem. It reassures them that they are capable of doing this. This year we probably have 40 to 45 youth in our program, and by youth I'm saying 19-year-olds who have never had an opportunity to work. And I also have to tell you that we, because of finances, we had to this year only employ 400 youth. We had over 1,000 youth apply to this program. And what we're doing, similar to what Mr. Clark was saying, is we have focused on the neighborhoods in St. Louis, both South Side and North Side, that have the highest concentration of young adults but very high crime rates. An example of that would be Walnut East and West and Dutchtown neighborhoods.
Mike, thank you very much for being here tonight. A group that's also trying to help tirelessly the clergy, religious organizations, and Bishop Bass. What are some of the efforts from your group, Urban Initiatives?
Well, we're operating with the same intent to increase self-awareness and a sense of self-worth. So we're doing things in our churches like offering a program similar to Shark, where young men have and young ladies have an opportunity to create a business model, and they actually compete for funding. We're establishing chess clubs in all of our churches because we realize there's a direct correlation between chess and skills that make it successful later in their life. So we're again looking for activities to increase their self-awareness, their sense of who they are, and keeping young people busy. And we've entered into countless partnerships with other organizations. For example, one of ours is the National Fatherhood Initiative. We're offering programs to teach men how to be a father and to provide them with activities as a father that they can be in a really strong relationship with their children. And all of them, again, are geared toward keeping young people busy. So our list of programs go on and on. But again, it goes back to our point that as a church, we have to do something different than what we've historically done and just have worship services. We really want to change the trajectory of people's lives.
And Mr. Clark, does that mean going door to door and recruiting and embracing these young people to give them that hope, the opportunity?
Yeah, when you look at the profile of the individuals that have sparked this national movement at this tragic murder of Michael Brown, I don't believe that all these well-intended programs reach them. We have to lower our trajectory. We're aiming many programs at young people that are already raised in homes that have middle-class values, and we need to lower them and reach the heart of the community. There have been countless reports done that zero in on the neighborhoods. I was a part of Freeman's administration back in '93 when St. Louis set the record for homicides. We simply looked at the map and said we need to go where the homicides are taking place. And if you look at the data from '93 to '94, we were able to have a substantial impact because we were able to go in conjunction with the Urban League. We set up at Northwest High School, and the Urban League was in that facility for over 2 months, helping individuals identify their needs and then bring them resources. Now, we pulled out, and when we pulled out, crime went back up. So we have to get smart.
All right, and here we are again. It does feel like we are on the brink. I want to thank all of our guests for joining us tonight. It's an important conversation. It is just 1 hour. The hope that we keep talking and doing, really doing, so that everybody finally ends up getting a chance. A chance is really all most people want.
And we hope the discussion like the one we just had can help in the healing process and avoid a repeat of the last few days. We want to sincerely thank our guests for joining us. Thank you, those of you that sent in questions, and those of you that took time to come into our audience and watch at home. Thank you very much for this important community conversation. We'll see you back here for News 4 at 10. Have a great rest of the evening.
Good night.